Hi there, and welcome back to Sky Skill Up Introduction to JavaScript course. And in this lesson, we'll be building a simple counter web app using JavaScript. So this counter app has the ability to add up. I can click on this minus to decrease it. I can click on this plus to increase the value. I can click on this minus to decrease the value. So I can also click on this button to reset it, and it goes back to 0. So let's go straight to our VS Code and build the project together. So first and foremost, we need to create our HTML file, our CSS file, and our JavaScript file. Now, in our HTML file, we need to set up our document structure. So I'll come here and say doctype HTML. Then I'll set up the HTML element, the head element, and below that I'll set up the body element. So in between the head element, I'm going to set up some elements, and this is basically, these are just meta tags. So I can come here, create my content. So in between this head element, I can come in here and create my title element. And this title element is going to have a title called simple counter. And after the title element, I am going to add another tag called the link tag. And this link tag is going to link whatever CSS or any other file we want to link to our HTML document. So here I'm going to link, so right here I am going to link a font library directly to our HTML file, and this font library is coming from a remote source. So I can just copy the link and paste it. That is going to link our CSS file to our HTML file. Now in our body element, we'll start by creating our container and every other element that we need. Now in between our body element, we're going to create every other element we need to create the counter app that we want. So I'm going to create a div, and in between the div, I create another div with a class called container. Then I create a h1 element with an ID of none and a value of 0. So we have another div, and that div has a class of btns, and I'm going to set up a button, and that button will have a class of dec, and we're going to place a class of fas fa dash minus. That's for the decrement. We're going to do the same for the reset. So this is for decrease, this is for reset. So that will be fas dash redo. Then I'm going to create that one, and this one is going to be for increment, which should be fas fa dash plus. So that's basically how, so this is basically all we need to do for the HTML section. Now when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see that the browser is plain. When I save my code and click on go live, it takes us straight it takes us straight to our browser, and you can see the result of our code, right? You can see the result of our code right here. So this link should be okay. That's my mistake. Now you can see the results right here. You can see the plus, the reset, and the minus. Now moving on, let's go straight to our CSS so that we can style that element. So I am going to add a star. This is a universal selector, and I'm going to give all the padding and margin 0. I'm also going to give all the elements about a box sizing or border box. Then I'm going to give the body a background color of 1316 to be. Then below that, I'm going to give my element a height of 100 view height, and it's going to have a display of grid. Now I'm going to place this item. I'm going to place every item inside the body directly to the center of the page. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see the changes that has been made. Now I'm going to give the wrapper a width. Then after that, I am going to style the container, and I'm going to give the width 100%. I'm going to give the element a padding of 40 pixels top and bottom, 15 pixels left and right. Then the element is going to have a background color of 191C37. Then it's going to have a border radius of 9 pixels. Then that our element will have a box shadow of 0, 25 pixels, 40 pixels, then RGBA 0, 0, 0, 0.2. So once I save it and go straight to our browser, you can see that we have made some change in that container element. And now moving on, I want to style an element after the container element. So I'll be making use of the after. So I'll be making use of this after property. Then I can come here and say the content should be an empty string. The element should be positioned absolutely, giving it a width of 85%. The element will be placed to the left by 7.5%. The element will have a height of 120%, bottom of -10%, and it's going to have a background color of 0087FF. And then after that, we're going to set up a z-index of -1, and then a border radius of 8 pixels. Now when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see the change that we have made. You can see that blue background behind this other background. So when I go straight to my VS Code, the next element that I'm going to style is going to be this heading element. So I am going to give my heading a text align property, and I'll align it to the center. Then I am going to give my heading a font family of Sego UI. Then after that, I'm going to increase the size of my element by giving it a font size of 60 pixels. Then I will make the color of that text white. So when I save it and go straight to my browser, you can see the change that we have made here. The next element that I would like to style would be this div that is holding these three buttons right here. So I'm going to select the element by class. Then after selecting the element by class, I'm going to give this element a flex display, and I'm going to place a space around that element. So the element is going to have a spacing at the top. Let's say I give it a spacing of about 80 pixels. Then after that, I'm going to style every button that is inside this element. So I would give every button a padding of 15 pixels top and bottom, 40 pixels left and right. Then I will give it a font size of 16 pixels. Then after that, I will place a border of none, and the element will have an outline property of none. Another thing we need to consider is that the element needs to have a border radius of 5 pixels, and we're going to give our element a cursor of pointer. So when I save it and I go straight to my browser, you can see the elements that we have created right here. We have the minus, the reset, and the plus. Now, as of now, it's going to look like this. By the time I reduce the zoom level of my screen, it's going to look okay. So let me reduce the zoom level, and as you can see, what we have right here is looking okay. So let's go back to our VS Code, and the next element that I will style is going to be the increment and the decrement. So I can come here and say dot inc, comma, button dot decrement. So I'm going to give the element a background color of 0087FF, which is like this light blue color. Then I'm going to give the element a color of white. Then I'm going to style my reset button. So the reset button is going to have a background color. The reset button is going to be transparent. It's going to have a border of about 4 pixels, solid, 0087FF, and it's going to have a color of that same 0087FF. So when I go straight to my HTML, now when I go straight to my HTML, all I need to do is to close this gap between the dot and the button element. So once I save my code and I go straight to my browser, you can see the change that has been made. Now that we're properly set up our HTML and our CSS file, the next thing we need to do is to set up our JavaScript. So first we'll create our JavaScript file. Then after that, we're going to select a couple of elements. So I'm going to select the container, then document.get element by ID. I believe I gave it an ID of none. Then I will assign the value to 0. Then after that, I will come here and select the increment button. So over here, I'll be making use of the query selector. I'll say document.query selector dot inc. Then I'll do the same for the decrement button. Document.query selector dot dec. So the next one I'm going to select is the reset button. So I'll come here and say let btn reset is equals to document dot query selector dot reset. So one more thing I'm going to do is to add an event listener to these buttons that I created right here. So for the increment button, I will add a click event listener. So it's going to be a click event. Then once that event or that button has been clicked, I'm going to increase the value by 1. So I will say value equals to value plus 1. Then the num container is now going to, the text content of the num container will not be the current value. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, if I click on, before you do anything, remember to link your script file to your HTML file. So I'm going to do mine now. I'm going to link my script file to my HTML file. Now as I click on plus, you can see that the value is incrementing. Now basically what that means is that the current value is equals to 0. And when I say value is equals to value plus 1, I'm simply saying value is equals to 0 plus 1, which makes the current value to be 1. And that current value will not be the text content of this num container that we have here, which is this. So I'm going to do the same for the decrement button, only that I'm going to add, the only difference would be wherever you see a plus, you add a minus. So I'll say value equals to value minus 1. Then I can come here and say num container dot text content is equals to value. So just like how we did this, the same thing goes for this section. The only difference is that this came with a plus while this came with a minus. So what that is trying to say is that the current value minus 1, then that current value, let's say if value is equals to 5, it will now say value is equals to value minus 1, which is value is equals to 5 minus 1. 5 minus 1 will now be 4. Then that 4, which is the current value, is now going to be passed as the text content of this num container. So this num container element, the value of the num container will no longer be 0. Rather, it's going to be whatever you have here as your value. So when I save my code and go straight to my browser, you can see that the plus is working. That's the increment. And you can also see that the decrement is working. Now I'm going to create one more for the reset button. I'm going to add an event listener of click, and I'm going to add a function. So what I'll do here is that I will say value is equals to 0 and num container dot text content is equals to value. So what I am also doing right here is that since we're working on the reset button. Now, when you click on this reset button, it is expected to change this value back to 0. Now, all I need to do is that when a user clicks on the reset button, the value will be assigned to 0, and that 0 will now be the new text content of this element right here. Right here. So once I save my code and I add an increment, I add a decrement, and when I click on the reset, it changes the value to 0. Now, another thing that I wanted to inform you guys is a simple shortcut on how we can work with this. So instead of us saying value is equals to value plus 1, you can make this shorter by saying value plus plus. So value plus plus is the same thing as value is equals to value plus 1. While value minus minus is the same thing as value equals to value minus 1. So I'm going to write the code like this to make it a lot more shorter and easier. So let me go back and test it. So you can see that the increment is working, the decrement is also working, and the reset is working. We have successfully created the counter web app. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next project.